Zigzag stared at the metal wall of his small room on Nexus Prime. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air system. Outside his window, purple clouds moved slowly across the orange sky. It was a peaceful day, but peace never came. Easy for the old Vorthan soldier. He sat in his favorite chair, the one made specially for his forearms and thick body. His skin, once bright blue like crystal, had turned dull gray over the years. Age spots covered his hands, and his compound eyes moved slower than they used to. 50 Earth years had passed since the Great War ended, but for Zigzag it felt like yesterday. On the small table next to his chair sat his collection of war medals, silver and gold pieces of metal that told the story of his military career. Commander rank badges, battle honors, campaign ribbons, Each one represented months or years of fighting across different star systems. But his eyes always went to one small piece of metal that did not belong with the others. It was a human dog tag, a simple piece of stamped metal on a chain. The words were worn but still readable. Jake Murphy, U.S. Marines. Zigzag had taken it from a battlefield 50 years ago. He told himself it was a trophy, proof of his victory over the strange aliens called humans. But deep down he knew it was something else entirely. The door chime rang, pulling him from his thoughts. Dr. Vexara entered, carrying her medical scanner and tablet. She was young for a Vorthan, maybe only 200 years old. Her skin still held the bright blue color of youth. "Good morning, Commander," she said in the formal way young Vorthans spoke to war veterans. "Time for your monthly checkup." Zigzag nodded and held still while she ran the scanner over his body. The device beeped softly as it checked his vital signs. Everything was normal for a Vorthan his age. His hearts were strong, his breathing was good, and his bones showed no new problems. "Your health looks fine," Dr. Vexara said, putting away her scanner. "But I wanted to talk to you about something else. Have you heard the news from the Galactic Council?" "I do not follow politics anymore," Zigzag replied. "I am retired." "The humans have been accepted as a protected species," she said. "They joined the council last week. The ceremony was quite impressive, I hear. Their delegation spoke about peace and cooperation between all species." The dog tag seemed to grow heavier in Zigzag's hand. He had picked it up without thinking, the way he always did when someone mentioned humans. His four hands began to shake slightly. "Commander, are you all right?" Dr. Vexara asked, noticing the change in his behavior. "I am fine," he lied. "Just tired." But he was not fine. The mention of humans had brought back the memories he tried so hard to forget. Images flashed through his mind like broken pieces of glass. Human soldiers firing their primitive weapons, the sound of their voices shouting orders, the way they moved in battle, quick and deadly despite their small size. After the doctor left, Zigzag could not sit still. He walked to his window and looked out at the peaceful colony. Families of different alien species walked along the streets below. Children played in the parks. It was the kind of life the war had been fought to protect, though at the time, no one had been sure which side was protecting what. He remembered his first briefing about humans 51 years ago. Admiral Kethmore had stood before the assembled fleet commanders in the war room of the battleship Spear of Justice. The holographic display showed a small blue and green planet in a distant arm of the galaxy. "Intelligence reports that these humans are a primitive species," the Admiral had said. "They have only recently developed space travel. Their weapons are basic projectile firearms and chemical explosives. Each human world should fall within days of our assault." How wrong they had been. Zigzag closed his eyes and found himself back on that first battlefield. Kepler Station, a small human outpost orbiting a gas giant. The Vorthan fleet had come out of hyperspace expecting to find frightened colonists ready to surrender. Instead, they found a military garrison that fought like cornered beasts. The station had been commanded by Captain Lisa Brooks, a human female with short brown hair and cold blue eyes. When Zigzag's ship had sent the standard surrender demand, her response had been 2 words: "Come and take it." The battle for Kepler Station lasted 3 days. 3 days that changed everything Zigzag thought he knew about warfare. The humans had inferior weapons and fewer soldiers, but they fought with something the Vorthons had never encountered before. They called it courage, but it seemed like madness to Zixthak. He watched human soldiers carry wounded comrades to safety while, under heavy fire, he saw them share their last food and water with civilians. He witnessed acts of sacrifice that made no logical sense from a military standpoint, yet somehow made the humans stronger as a fighting force. But it was Private Jake Murphy who haunted Zixthak the most. The boy could not have been more than 20 Earth years old, barely an adult by human standards, younger than some Vorthon children. He had been assigned to guard an evacuation point where human civilians were being loaded onto escape ships. When Zixthak's ground forces broke through the outer defenses, Murphy found himself alone at his post. His unit had been ordered to fall back, but the evacuation was not complete. The logical thing would have been to retreat with his comrades. Instead, Murphy stayed. For 6 hours, one human boy held off an entire Vorthon assault squad. He used every trick of urban warfare, every piece of cover, every explosive device he could find. When his rifle ran out of ammunition, he used his sidearm. When that was empty, he threw grenades. When those were gone, he fought with a knife. Zixthak had been leading the assault personally. He watched through his tactical display as his soldiers tried again and again to dislodge the young human from his position. Murphy moved like water, appearing and disappearing, striking and vanishing before they could respond. The boy should have died 10 times over. Any reasonable creature would have surrendered or fled. But humans, Zixthak learned that day, were not reasonable creatures. They were something far more dangerous. When the last civilian ship cleared the docking bay, Murphy finally fell back. But he had bought his people the time they needed. Every human civilian on Kepler Station escaped because one boy decided to stand alone against impossible odds. Zixthak found Murphy's body 3 hours later, slumped behind a makeshift barricade. The dog tag had been around his neck, along with a small photograph of a human female and a young child. His family, perhaps, or friends from home. Standing in his quiet room 50 years later, Zixthak could still see that young face. Still remember the determination in those human eyes, even in death. It was a look that said he had done exactly what he chose to do, and he had no regrets. The old Vorthon veteran sat back down in his chair and closed his eyes. Outside, the peaceful sounds of the colony continued, but inside his head, the war would never end. The nightmare started 3 weeks after Dr. Vexara's visit. Every night, Zixthak would close his eyes and find himself back on those ancient battlefields. He would wake up in cold sweat, his forearms shaking and his heart beating too fast. The peaceful retirement he had built for himself was crumbling away like old stone. During the day, he tried to keep busy. He tended to his small garden where he grew Vorthon fruits and vegetables. He read books about history and science. He watched entertainment programs on his viewing screen, but nothing could stop his mind from wandering back to the war and the humans he had fought against. One morning, while trying to distract himself, Zixthak made a decision that would change everything. He activated his personal computer and began searching through old military databases. His veteran access code still worked, giving him entry to records that most civilians could never see. He started by looking up the human soldiers from Kepler Station. The names came back to him easily, burned into his memory by years of trying to forget them. Captain Lisa Brooks, Sergeant Pete Martinez, Private Jake Murphy, and dozens of others who had made his life so difficult during those 3 terrible days. What he found surprised him. Captain Brooks had survived Kepler Station, but she died 2 years later defending the Titan colonies from another Vorthon attack. The record showed she had saved over 10,000 human civilians by holding a key position until the evacuation was complete. She received something called the Medal of Honor, the highest award humans gave for bravery. Sergeant Martinez lived through most of the war, fighting in 12 major battles across 6 different star systems. He died during the siege of Europa Base, leading a desperate charge that broke through Vorthon lines and allowed human reinforcements to land. He was 43 years old and had 3 children back on Earth. One by one, Zixthak looked up the soldiers he remembered. Most had died in later battles. Some lived to see the war's end but died of their wounds in the years that followed. A few simply disappeared from the records, their fates unknown. But Jake Murphy was different. According to the database, Private Murphy had actually survived Kepler Station. Zixthak had been wrong about finding his body. The young soldier had been badly wounded and left for dead, but human rescue teams found him hours later. He spent 6 months in a military hospital recovering from injuries that should have killed him. Murphy went on to fight in 8 more battles during the war. He was promoted to sergeant and later to lieutenant. He received multiple decorations for bravery and leadership. When the war ended, he was 26 years old with a chest full of medals and scars covering half his body. The most surprising discovery was what Murphy did after the war. Instead of staying in the military or finding some other dangerous job, he became a teacher. He worked at a school for war orphans on Earth, helping children who had lost their families during the fighting. The database showed he was still alive, now 71 years old and still teaching. Zixthak stared at the computer screen for a long time. The young soldier who had fought so fiercely, who had seemed ready to die for strangers, had spent the rest of his life caring for children. It made no sense to the old Vorthan warrior. As the days passed, Zixthak found himself digging deeper into human records. He learned about their culture, their history, their way of thinking. What he discovered both fascinated and disturbed him. Humans, he learned, were a species that seemed to thrive on contradiction. They could be incredibly violent in war, yet incredibly gentle in peace. They formed deep emotional bonds with each other, bonds that made them fight harder and sacrifice more than any logical creature should. They had something they called love, which seemed to make them both stronger and more vulnerable at the same time. The more he read, the more Zixthak realized how little his people had understood about their enemy. The Vorthan Empire had seen humans as primitive animals, useful only as slaves or obstacles to be removed. They had never tried to understand what made humans so dangerous in battle. It was their connections to each other, Zixthak realized. Every human soldier fought not just for victory or duty, but for the other humans around them. They would die to protect their friends, their families, their comrades. It was not logical, but it was incredibly powerful. The nightmares grew worse as his research continued. Now, instead of just reliving old battles, Zixthak began to dream about the human soldiers as real people. He saw Captain Brooks tucking her children into bed before leaving for her final mission. He imagined Sergeant Martinez teaching his sons how to throw a baseball. He pictured Jake Murphy reading stories to war orphans, his scarred hands gentle. As he turned the pages one night, the nightmare was so vivid that Zixthak woke up screaming. His neighbor, an elderly Centaurian named Klix, came over to check on him. She found the old Vorthan sitting on his floor, shaking and muttering in his native language. "What is wrong, my friend?" Klix asked, sitting down beside him with her tentacles curled in concern. "I killed them," Zixthak whispered. "I killed so many of them, and they were just trying to protect each other." Klix had been through her own war many years before. She understood the weight that old soldiers carried. "You were following orders," she said softly. "You did what you thought was right at the time." "But what if I was wrong?" Zixthak asked. "What if we were the bad ones in that war?" It was a question that had been growing in his mind for weeks. The Vorthan Empire had always taught that they were bringing order and civilization to primitive species. But the more he learned about humans, the more he wondered if they had been the invaders, the destroyers, the ones who brought death and suffering to innocent worlds. The next day, Zixthak made another decision. He contacted the Galactic Council's diplomatic office and requested permission to visit Earth. As a war veteran, he had certain travel rights that normal civilians did not. It took several weeks to process his application, but eventually, the approval came through. His family was shocked when he told them about his plans. His daughter Sixamara visited him immediately, her skin pale with worry. "Father, why do you want to go to the human homeworld?" she asked. "What could you possibly gain from such a journey?" Zixthak looked at Jake Murphy's dog tag, which he still carried with him everywhere. "I need to understand," he said. "I need to know who they really were." They were the enemy, Sixmara replied. That is all you need to know. But Zixthak shook his head. No, daughter. I think they were something much more complicated than that, and I think I need to find out what that was before I can ever find peace. The transport ship to Earth would leave in 2 weeks. Zixthak began making his preparations, though he was not sure what he hoped to find when he got there. All he knew was that the nightmares would not stop until he faced the truth about the war, about the humans, and about himself. The transport ship touched down on Earth at a place called Denver Spaceport. Zixthak had never seen anything like the human homeworld. From space, it looked like a blue and white marble, covered in swirling clouds and vast oceans. As the ship descended through the atmosphere, he could see green forests, brown mountains, and cities that sparkled like jewels in the sunlight. The spaceport was busy with travelers from dozens of different worlds. Humans moved among aliens with easy confidence, speaking multiple languages and helping visitors find their way. Zixthak had expected to feel afraid or angry being surrounded by his former enemies, but instead he felt something unexpected. He felt welcome. A young human woman approached him as he collected his luggage. She wore the blue uniform of a diplomatic aide and had a friendly smile on her face. "Commander Zixthak?" she asked. "My name is Linda Carter. I'm here to help you during your visit to Earth." Zixthak nodded, still surprised by how small humans looked in person. This woman barely came up to his chest, yet her ancestors had fought his people to a standstill across half the galaxy. "Thank you," he said in his careful English. "I am looking for someone, a former soldier named Jake Murphy." Linda checked her tablet. "Yes, we have that information in your file. Mr. Murphy lives in Montana now. He's expecting you tomorrow. Tonight, we have a hotel room ready for you in the city." The hotel room was simple but comfortable, with a bed large enough for his four-armed body and a window that looked out over the human city. Zixthak spent hours watching the streets below. Humans walked with their children, laughed with their friends, and went about their daily lives in peaceful contentment. These were the same creatures who had fought so ferociously during the war. The next morning, Linda drove him to the airport where they boarded a small aircraft for the flight to Montana. Zixthak pressed his face to the window, amazed by the variety of landscapes below. Vast plains of golden wheat stretched to the horizon. Rivers wound through green valleys like silver ribbons. Mountains rose up like the bones of sleeping giants. "Your world is very beautiful," he told Linda. "Thank you," she replied. "We're proud of it. My grandfather used to say that Earth was worth fighting for no matter the cost." The words sent a chill through Zixthak. He wondered if her grandfather had fought in the war. If so, they might have been enemies once, shooting at each other across some distant battlefield. They landed at a small airport in a town called Helena. From there, Linda drove him along winding roads through forests and farmland. Finally, they arrived at a modest school building surrounded by playing fields and gardens. A sign read, "Riverside Academy for Children." Jake Murphy was waiting for them in the parking lot. Zixthak recognized him immediately, despite the 50 years that had passed. The human was smaller than the old alien remembered, with gray hair and lines around his eyes. But his posture was still straight, and his gaze was still steady. He wore simple clothes and leaned on a walking stick, but there was no mistaking the soldier he had once been. "Commander," Murphy said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I have to admit, I never expected to see you again." Zixthak stared at the offered hand for a moment, then carefully shook it with one of his own. The human's grip was firm despite his age. "You remember me?" Zixthak said. Murphy smiled. "Hard to forget a four-armed alien who spent 3 days trying to kill me. Come on, let's take a walk. I want to show you something." They walked around the school grounds while Linda waited in the car. Children were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing across the fields. Some were human, but Zixthak saw other species too. Young centaurians chased balls with their tentacles. A small group of Vorthon children played a singing game he remembered from his own youth. "These are all war orphans," Murphy explained. "Kids who lost their parents during various conflicts over the past 50 years. We teach them, care for them, and help them find new families when possible. "Why do you do this work?" Zixthak asked. Murphy was quiet for a moment, watching a young human boy help a fallen Altarian child back to her feet. "After the war ended, I had a choice," he said finally. "I could spend the rest of my life hating the people who killed my friends, or I could try to make sure fewer children grow up without parents. I chose the second option." They sat down on a bench under a large tree. Murphy pulled out an old photograph and handed it to Zixthak. It showed a group of human soldiers in military uniforms all smiling at the camera. Zixthak recognized several faces from Kepler Station. "That was taken a week before the battle," Murphy said. "Most of those men and women didn't make it home. For a long time I wondered why I survived when they didn't. I used to have nightmares about it." "Nightmares?" Zixthak looked at the human with surprise. "Oh, yes. For years after the war ended, I would wake up screaming. I saw their faces in my dreams, heard their voices calling for help. The doctors called. It's survivor's guilt, but it felt like my mind was trying to punish me for living when they died." Zixthak felt a strange connection to this former enemy. "I have nightmares too," he admitted. "I see the faces of the humans I killed, I hear their voices. I cannot find peace." Murphy nodded slowly. "That's why you came here, isn't it? You're looking for a way to make the dreams stop." "Yes," Zixthak said quietly. "But I do not know how." "The first step is understanding that we were all just soldiers doing our jobs," Murphy said. "You weren't evil, and we weren't heroes. We were young people caught up in something bigger than ourselves, trying to protect the things we cared about." Over. The next few hours, Murphy introduced Zixthak to other human veterans who worked at the school. Colonel Diana West had lost her left arm in the war but now taught mathematics to alien children. Major Alex Turner walked with a limp from an old wound, but coached the school's sports teams with endless patience. Each veteran had their own story of loss and recovery. They spoke openly about their struggles with nightmares, guilt, and anger. But they also talked about finding purpose in helping others, in building something positive from the ashes of war. "We learned something important after the fighting stopped," Diana explained over dinner. "Hatred is like poison. It hurts the person carrying it more than anyone else. If we want to heal, we have to let go of the anger and find a way to help others." That evening, Zixthak sat in his hotel room and thought about everything he had seen and heard. These humans had every reason to hate him and his people. They had lost friends, family members, and parts of themselves to Vorthon weapons. Yet they had chosen forgiveness over revenge, healing over hatred. For the first time in 50 years, Zixthak began to believe that peace might be possible. Not just an end to fighting, but real peace in his heart and mind. The nightmares might never go away completely, but perhaps they could become something else. Perhaps they could become a reminder of why peace was worth fighting for. 3 days before Zixthak was supposed to return to Nexus Prime, Jake Murphy made an unexpected request. They were sitting in the school library, watching children from different worlds studying together, when the old human teacher turned to his former enemy. "There's something I want to ask you," Murphy said quietly. "Next week is Memorial Day. It's when we remember soldiers who died in wars. This year, our town is having a special ceremony to honor veterans from both sides of the Great War. Would you be willing to speak?" Zixthak felt his heart skip a beat. "Speak? To humans? About the war?" "To everyone," Murphy corrected. "Humans, yes, but also other species who live here now. Families who lost people in the fighting. Veterans who are still struggling with what happened. People who need to hear that healing is possible." The idea terrified Zixthak more than any battle he had ever fought. Facing enemy soldiers with weapons was one thing. Standing before grieving families and admitting his part in their pain was something entirely different. "I do not know if I can do this," he said honestly. Murphy smiled. "I felt the same way the first time I spoke at one of these ceremonies. But sometimes the things that scare us most are the things we need to do most." That night, Zixthak lay awake thinking about Murphy's request. He thought about all the human soldiers whose names he had researched. He thought about Captain Brooks and her children. He thought about Sergeant Martinez and his family back on Earth. He thought about the young faces in that old photograph Murphy had shown him. By morning, he had made his decision. The memorial ceremony was held in the town's Central Park. Hundreds of people gathered around a stage decorated with flowers and flags from many different worlds. Zixthak saw humans of all ages, from elderly veterans to young children. He also saw members of other species who had fought in the war or lost family members during the conflict. When it was his turn to speak, Zixthak walked slowly to the podium. His 4 hands shook as he looked out at the crowd. For a moment, he could not find his voice. Then he saw Jake Murphy in the front row, nodding encouragingly. "My name is Zixthak," he began, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. 50 years ago, I was a commander in the Vorthan Imperial Fleet. I came to your worlds as an invader. I fought against your soldiers and caused pain to your families. I am here today to tell you about the humans I fought against, and what they taught me about honor." He spoke about the Battle of Kepler Station, describing the courage he had witnessed there. He told them about Private Jake Murphy's impossible stand, about Captain Brooks's leadership, about Sergeant Martinez's sacrifice. He spoke honestly about his own role in the fighting, about the orders he had given and the lives that were lost because of his decisions. "For 50 years, I have been haunted by nightmares," he continued. "I saw your faces in my dreams and wondered why you fought so hard, why you would die for people you barely knew. Now I understand. You were not fighting for conquest or glory, you were fighting for love. Love for your families, love for your friends, love for people you had never met but promised to protect." Some people in the crowd were crying now. Zixthak saw an elderly human woman in the 3rd row with tears streaming down her face. She was holding a photograph of a young soldier, probably her son or grandson. "I cannot bring back the people who died in that war," Zixthak said, his voice growing stronger. "I cannot undo the pain I caused your families. But I can promise you this. I will spend the rest of my life making sure that their sacrifice meant something. I will work to prevent future wars and help those who are still suffering from old ones." When he finished speaking, the crowd was completely silent. Zixthak feared he had said something wrong, that his words had only made their pain worse. Then one person began to clap. It was Murphy, rising slowly to his feet. Soon others joined him, until the entire crowd was applauding. After the ceremony, many people approached Zixthak to shake his hand or share their own stories. The elderly woman with the photograph introduced herself as Margaret Stone. Her grandson had died at Europa Base, killed in the same battle where Sergeant Martinez fell. "Thank you for remembering them," she said simply. "Thank you for seeing them as people, not just enemies." Murphy found Zixthak later that evening as he was packing for his return journey. The human teacher carried a wrapped package in his hands. "Have something for you," Murphy said, handing over the package. Inside was the old photograph of the Kepler Station garrison, the same one Murphy had shown him earlier. But now it was framed, with a small plaque at the bottom that read, "In memory of those who served with honor on both sides." "I want you to have this," Murphy said. "Remember us not as enemies, but as fellow soldiers who did our duty." Zixthak's hands trembled as he accepted the gift. In return, he pulled out a small crystal pendant from his travel bag. It was carved with traditional Vorthan symbols and inscribed with the names of every soldier, human and Vorthan, who had died at Kepler Station. "This is a memory crystal," he explained. "In my culture, we use them to honor the dead. I want you to have it, so that our people's sacrifice will not be forgotten." They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 old soldiers who had found an unexpected friendship in the ruins of an old war. When Zixthak returned to Nexus Prime, he was a changed being. The nightmares did not disappear completely, but they became less frequent and less frightening. Instead of seeing accusing faces in his dreams, he began to see the faces of the children at Murphy's school, laughing and playing together despite their different origins. He used his veteran's pension to establish the Cross-Species Trauma Recovery Center, working with doctors and counselors from many different worlds to help veterans cope with war's aftermath. He collaborated with human psychologists like Dr. Rachel Kim and Dr. Ben Taylor, sharing Vorthan healing techniques while learning human methods of therapy. Years passed, and Zixthak grew old even by Vorthan standards. His skin became completely gray and his movements grew slow and careful. But his mind remained sharp, and his dedication to helping others never wavered. On his final day, surrounded by friends and family in his small room on Nexus Prime, Zixthak held two objects close to his chest. One was the framed photograph of the human soldiers from Kepler Station. The other was Jake Murphy's old dog tag, which he had carried for over 60 years. He thought about the young Vorthan students he now taught, telling them stories about the humans he had once fought against. He made sure they understood both the horror of war and the possibility of peace that could follow. He taught them that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the courage to protect others and the wisdom to forgive old enemies. As consciousness faded, Zixthak's last thought was of Jake Murphy reading stories to war orphans, his scarred hands gentle as he turned the pages. The old alien smiled, finally at peace with the memories that had haunted him for so long. The war was over, and in its place something better had grown.